now we'll take a look at the hospital and the, I suppose, will we just walk up to the hospital?
Probably be. This obviously was the second gate, or the time lock thing that you'd have went through
Yes,
for.
yes.
Because the hospital was a single-storey block as well, wasn't it?
Yes.
That's why I'm looking at this double two-storey.
You see, I think that might well have been what they would have called the cell block. I'm not sure now, but see, there was a special. Believe it or
That
not,
was
they
the
had to
board.
have it. That's the boards.
Boards, right.
But believe it or not, there wasn't. They didn't believe even that the Hedge blocks were in themselves sufficiently severe.
So how much, obviously with the hospital, when you'd have went quite a bit further again
Yes.
to get to the Hedge blocks.
Oh yes. 4 or 5.
Aye. Sort of like a ward more.
Yes, 4 or 5 beds.
And possibly for theirs.
And you see, this was a great luxury in Long Kesh because there was no in-cell sanitation. So the fact that people staying in this cell overnight, there would have been at least 4 beds in this room. When I was here in the hospital, that snooker table wasn't here. Mm-hmm. Now obviously at some stage this has been turned into a recreation room. My time this was a 4-person ward, but the luxury of it was that you could use the toilet at night, which was unheard of because there is no in-cell, or was no in-cell sanitation in Long Kesh. Now that room over there, that's the canteen or the association room. Now remember, all of these grills were locked at the time, and at a certain stage prisoners who were in the hospital were in there. This was the kitchen because the hospital run a somewhat more relaxed regime than the rest of the place, the MOs or the medical officers would have made you a cup of tea, or some of the orderlies, prison nurses who were doing orderly, might have made men a cup of tea, but they would have prepared some, not the meals were prepared in the prison cookhouse, but they would have made a cup of tea or something like that in there. Now, we were still, in most of the other cells, we were still slopping out, and that's the sluice there for slopping out. Now I'll tell you what happened. That's the bathroom. These cells, you might effectively call them cells and or wards, but they don't look like wards. Now, the last time you met me in here, this is where I was, Angela, and the last time you saw me in here,
you were about that size. That's possible.
I would have been the first few days of 1981. This is where I was in this ward here on hunger strike, and
you were advising me to bring in chocolate, the dark chocolate biscuits. You didn't like the light chocolate.
Possibly. I remember there would have been a locker to that side of the bed, and maybe a chair on that side.
That's right, the chair. You were allowed to sit this side.
And visitors would have sat there, which was a big concession to allow visitors to visit prisoners in the cell. Now, to me, this particular cell, although it has to an outsider, this looks a fairly restricted area, and you still have the bars in the window. But to me, coming from the cells in the Hedge Block, this seems to be an enormous, large, comfortable.
Bigger window, probably even, is it?
No, about the same size, but it's not as high up. It's more comfortable to look through. And I was here in this cell here. By the time the hunger strike ended, of course, I was quite ill, and it took me a good few days to get over it. But I remember Parry coming up to see me here.
He was brought in.
He was brought into this room here because he was in the criminal road.
That's right. He was in the.
And they brought him up here to see me, and that was a few days before the hunger strike ended. Because I remember for the last fortnight or 10 days, I was getting a visit every day, and I thought it was because there had been a loosening up in the Northern Ireland office, and they had saw the light and they were becoming much more liberal. I didn't realise I was so close to death. And I took it that this was a marvellous gesture from the NIO, but instead...
I remember Pádraig saying that he was convinced, he was contented that it was the last time.
And I didn't know that for a long time afterwards, just how ill I was. I'm nearly sure that's where Tom McFeely was. Or maybe it was Brendan Hughes. Maybe it was Tom McFeely, and I think Brendan was over there because Sean McKenna was in there. Sean was in there, and then we had Leo Green, Raymond McKearney, John Nixon in the other rooms, and I just can't remember for the life of me at this stage now which of them, who was where, but they were in some of those rooms there. Now, at this stage, obviously the second hunger strike then is the one that's the more awful, and the boys would have died in these cells. As a matter of interest, now on one of the visits they told me where each man died, and seemingly they've lost the definitive record, as you could well imagine. But the last time I ever saw Bobby Sands, he was standing at that door. He had come down to see us, and I was still in bed, and I couldn't, my eyesight was still bad. And I knew the voice. I recognised his voice more than I recognised his face, but the shape, of course. But I remember him saying, "How are you?" and I spoke to him. And that was the last time I saw Bobby. I remember we used to every morning, we moved here on I think the 45th day of our hunger strike, because for the 45, for 10 days we were in the Hedge Block itself, in the ordinary routine wing. After the 10th day they moved us to a special wing but in the same block. And then on the 45th day, which would have been 10 from 45 is 35, so we were 35 days in that special wing, and then we moved here. But I'm nearly sure 45. It was about, I was only here a couple of days, or maybe only one day, when my health deteriorated seriously and rapidly. But I remember I was standing in there, and I think I wasn't slopping out actually. I think I was waiting in here to give a urine sample, because they were taking measurements of us routinely, and I was being weighed. Every day they would weigh us. They would take a blood and urine sample to find out how our body was. That was the medical authorities. But I remember I was giving a urine sample, and I just went out. And I was fortunate in the sense that there was two of the medical officers were with me, and I can remember their faces and I can't remember their names. Paul and Cormac were their first names, and all I remember was coming around in a wheelchair, because the two men had caught me as I fell. Luckily enough, the two MOs caught me, got a chair and put me in it, and I remember being wheeled back to the cell, and I opened my eyes and the world was black, because I couldn't see. My sight had gone, and I was in serious trouble thereafter. I didn't get out of the bed after that, and until the whole thing was over. But that's where that happened.
Other than the hunger strike, were you in the hospital wing?
The only time, no, I never was in this hospital. The only other time I would have been down in this block, and I would have been here several times, but I would have been here, say the dentist was here.
Right.
And
opticians or...
the optician really wasn't a big... Yes, you would have come down here, I think, for the optician. Right. But it was more for the dentist. And the dentist, wherever he was around here, and the dentist was a bit of a penance, because you were held. There was a waiting room here, and you are in prison, remember. So you were kept in this small room here, and this was the waiting room, and you would have been held here with the door locked. Now, fortunately enough, there was a toilet in the corner. But you'd have been kept in this room. There might have been 5 or 10 men in here, and waiting, and then being taken out one at a time. And I remember one incident. It was shortly after the protest had ended, and we got the clothes. And there was a character here, and I'll not mention his name, but he was determined to prove that he was a solid, staunch Republican. But he had just been sentenced and had no, or very little, Irish. But he come down here, and invariably the ex-blanket men spoke Irish, because they didn't know who else was in the place, and very often you could have had loyalists or even civilian prisoners. And there was a number of us speaking Irish, one to the other, and this man was determined let the rest of the world know who he was. So he jumped up and said the Hail Mary, said the wrong word. And there was such deep running cynicism among black men that they sort of just put their heads down and said, where did we get this out of? But I can't remember which of those rooms, Angela, but some of them you would have had the dentist surgery and probably the optician, things like that. It was somewhere around here. Yeah, and you'd have had dispensaries and things like that, you know.
Radiation.
I do know this was the theatre, or certainly the X-ray room. Now, most of my time here, they didn't actually, I don't think this was very extensively used for a simple enough reason, because breaks, you'd only really use that for breaks. They actually had the facility to carry out an operation in here, but they didn't, because at the end of the day, I think they found out that X-raying a break is something really that has to be done by people who specialise in it, rather than medics. So they would do that, and I don't think it was used very often in my time. And that contraption there is the padded cell. It's a gruesome spectacle. Imagine putting a human being into that there and keeping them in this room here just because their mental faculties had went. I don't know if it was used that often, to be honest. So it was just the fact that it's there is an appalling thought.
Isn't it?
Will we move on?
Look in there, I don't see a chair, dentist chair, or anything in any of them.
No, well, I'd say a dentist's chair, as far as I know, is a fairly expensive piece of equipment, so it
would be taken out.
It probably would have been taken out. In fact, we had one very good dentist here at the time of the hunger strike, but I think they soon replaced him with less talented. A lot of this, you see, that'd be an admin area.
All wiped off it.
And wiped off, and you see, always you get the
window
observation slot. Remember you were talking about grills, that's the type of grills, a more common one that I remember.